Today, the topic is becoming a cultural architect. I am very excited about this particular webinar. It has everything to do with everything that we all do. And today's host is Dr. Clark. He's the author of The 4 Stages of Psychological Safety. The book celebrated its 1-year anniversary just a couple months ago, and we have been going full steam ahead with the area of psychological safety. The category is definitely here, and it is definitely here to stay. So if you haven't read the book yet, we would highly encourage you to pick that up. I'll give you a deeper dive into some of the things that we're going to be talking about today. Additionally, if you have read the book, we would highly encourage you to go and leave us a review on Amazon. That helps us get the word of psychological safety out even more broadly to the world and accomplish our mission. So that would really help us out if you haven't had a chance to do that.
What we're seeing as we talk to people and organizations throughout the world, there's a greater willingness to engage in an institutional examination of conscience than there ever has been. I've never seen anything like it in my professional lifetime. And so we need to take the opportunity to push forward, and we have the chance to accelerate our efforts. Yeah. Well, let's jump into the agenda for today. The topic is becoming a cultural architect. Let's take a minute, we'll pause just a minute and ask the question, what is that all about? Have you ever thought of yourself as a cultural architect? Have you ever framed your role that way? Regardless of whether you have or you haven't, you are a cultural architect. And the interesting thing about it is that's not an option. It's not something that you can abdicate. You can't say, you know what, I want to take the day off. I'm not going to be a cultural architect, but I'll do that tomorrow. You can't do that. And the reason is because you radiate influence to your colleagues, to all of the people that you associate with and interact with. And you do that every day, you do that every hour. And even in your absence, you're influencing people and you're modeling certain norms and assumptions and behaviors. And you can't not do that, right? And so the only question is, which values, which assumptions, which behavioral norms are you modeling? Because you're going to get a culture no matter which way you do it. You can do culture by design or you can do culture by default. Regardless of the approach you take, you're going to get a culture at the end. You're always going to get a culture. As soon as humans interact on any kind of a sustained basis, norms begin to emerge and form, and then they shape people, the interactions, and the people shape those, and you're going to get a culture. Regardless of how you approach it, you will get a culture. And so what we're saying is, let's be intentional about it. Let's be cultural architects in the deliberate sense of the word. And that's really what we're here to talk about today. And we're going to focus on 4 primary behaviors that are essential to doing culture by design. Number 1, inclusion modeling. What does that mean and how do you do it? We're going to talk a little bit about that. Number 2, micro coaching. Now, that may be a new concept for some of you. Micro coaching is the emerging pattern of coaching across organizations in the world. And we'll talk about what it is and how you do it. And then the 3rd behavior is learning agility. Learning agility. Learning agility means that you are learning at or above the speed of change. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then finally, the 4th behavior is cultural accountability. Now, we all know about accountability. We're all accountable, and we have to hold each other accountable. But how about holding each other accountable for culture, for the culture that you're creating and reinforcing as an individual? That's cultural accountability. And that's a very important part of being a cultural architect. So we're going to run through these 4 behaviors. Now, why is this so important? Because if we're doing culture by design, we're trying to nurture, we're trying to cultivate a culture of psychological safety, a high level of psychological safety. So let's just go back to the basic definition of psychological safety. Psychological safety is an environment of rewarded vulnerability. And I'm just going to remind you, you can't be successful. You can't be yourself. You can't learn. You can't contribute. You can't challenge the status quo and innovate unless those behaviors are rewarded. If they're punished, then you're going to respond to that. You're going to withdraw. You're going to recoil. You're going to manage personal risk, and you're not going to be able to reach your potential as an individual or a team or an organization. Psychological safety is the central measure of the overall health and vibrancy and capacity of a culture. So there's the connection between culture and psychological safety. So Junior, let's jump into the first behavior, which is inclusion modeling. Inclusion modeling, if we break this down, it includes several different behaviors that are part of these. Would you like to run through these a little bit for us, Junior?
I would. And before I do that, I want to acknowledge one thing that I think is particularly interesting. When we say become a cultural architect, it's not just in the workplace. One of the cool things that I've seen as a product of our work in this area is that it changes social collectives generally. Anywhere there's more than one human, a culture exists. And that could be a group of friends, a family, any social collective. These types of norms will emerge by design or by default. So all of the things that we're going to talk about today, all of these behaviors aren't applicable exclusively at work. They're applicable more broadly in all of our relationships.
That's very true.
Inclusion modeling. Number one is validating. Tim, tell us what validating means.
Validating means that you are acknowledging and affirming the humanity of the people around you. And this is where inclusion modeling begins. You're demonstrating behaviors and gestures that do this. They validate others. So I think we ought to ask a question on this one, Junior.
Let's do it.
What are some examples of how you can validate? Because this is really the very first validating behavior. You're acknowledging and you're recognizing. Okay, and isn't this interesting? So here come the examples. So many of these are so simple. Isn't that true?
So simple and they're so good. Yeah, Angie says, I see you, I hear you. Walter, inclusion means that the command and control model is not applied. Accept without boundaries. Jessica says recognition. Jason, a nod. Melinda, active listening.
Yeah.
Thanks and appreciation. Tell me more, say more. Kimberly, I really like that one. Jessica, repeating the highlights. Raphael, open to learning from others. These are all really, really good.
I love this
really
one, Junior.
Good. And they're simple and they take
just leaning forward when someone is speaking. Isn't that interesting? But it communicates very clearly that what you're saying is important. I acknowledge you and I'm giving you my attention. So these are validating behaviors.
Yep. I just saw like 100 of these roll in. I think there are like 100 answers. So
Yes.
the chat is a gold mine, everyone. So don't be afraid to scroll backwards on these comments and look what everyone is saying, especially on the other platforms as well, LinkedIn, etc. Okay, so let's go to number 2.
Asking.
What is asking all about?
So asking, and you'll notice this with all the validating behaviors, they create inclusion as a natural consequence. It's the natural fruit of these behaviors. So if you're asking is also coincidentally a form of validating. When you're asking, you're acknowledging that the person you're speaking with is important, what they think matters, what they feel matters, and you're interested in that. So asking is another fundamental form of inclusion modeling. It's another way that we model that. But we have to do it with the right intent, right? It's got to be genuine. It's got to be real. We're not surface acting here. This is real asking with the intent to then listen, which is number 3, listen and understand. And if you don't understand, what do? You go back and you ask again you ask clarifying questions so that you really understand where a person is coming from. So again, these are inclusion modeling behaviors that are so fundamental, but we still struggle with these, don't we?
We do. Why do you think we struggle with these, everyone? I'd be interested in your thoughts. If they really are so simple and out the gate, we can come up with 100 examples, then what's the hang up? The first two comments were ego. I'm seeing a ton of ego in here.
So Junior, this reminds me when we went in to have lunch the other day at a Japanese restaurant, and we ordered a couple of bento boxes, and they were short on staff at the restaurant. And you could tell that this gentleman was just stressed out of his mind, and he was running around, and customers were treating him rudely because they were short-staffed. Well, what does that do? It makes it even worse, makes him feel worse. And so the resentment builds on both sides. And so what I did is the only thing I said is, man, it looks like you're really, really busy today. I'm so sorry that you're overloaded. And it was just that acknowledgement. I really couldn't change the situation. I couldn't go put an apron on and help him, but I could just acknowledge it. And he smiled at me. He smiled at me and he said, well, no, it's a hard day, but thanks for being patient. So do you see how far those little things go? They really do.
And I love the idea of practicing these types of behaviors in situations like this, right?
Yeah.
With your Uber driver or with the cashier or whoever you find yourself in a room with, these things all apply, as I was saying before.
Yeah, they do. So number 4 is inviting. Now, sometimes we think of inviting as big. So I'm inviting you to something that's significant. For example, I'm inviting you to dinner or something that's kind of a big thing. I don't want you to think big. I want you to think small. What are small invitations that we can extend? Small things. Think small, not big. So what can we do that is a gesture of invitation? Okay.
So Lisa says,
I love this.
Invite to the conversation. I like that one.
I love this one. Tell me your story. I'm inviting you to tell me your story. That's wonderful. Or just tell me more.
Inviting to share perspective genuinely. Some folks need to be invited in order to respond. Recognizing that is huge. I've seen that a lot lately, where managers may have a blind spot because they are extroverted by nature and perhaps expect that others will engage of their own accord just because. But a lot of people do need that invitation, at least the first couple times, to become comfortable. So I like that comment a lot.
Do you know what the most important invitation of all may be, Junior? These 4 words. What do you think? That may be the most important invitation of all. So think about that, right? So that's number 4. And then number 5 is sharing. So inviting is you're soliciting, but 5 is now you're giving, you're sharing. So what are some simple ways that we can share? Now, again, what does this do? It creates inclusion as a natural consequence. That's what these behaviors do. So what can we share that's simple?
Some vulnerability. I've got that in the first couple comments here. So Yolanda and Bernadette, I agree with that. And you don't have to, wear your heart on your sleeve necessarily and share your life story in an hour. Like this could be, very small stuff with showing vulnerability. It could be as simple as saying, I'm not sure. I don't know. Or admitting a mistake, something that didn't go quite right. So showing vulnerability that way, I think, is a powerful thing. Be honest about something.
Yeah, I love that.
Share stories.
Yeah.
These are all good. Thank you, everyone.
So these are the 5 basic inclusion modeling behaviors. And you may look at them and at first blush, you may think, well, they're pretty simple. And my response to that would be, yeah, you're right. They are. The question is, can you do them? Are you willing to do them consistently? I think that's what matters the most. And if you do, and if you're willing to demonstrate these consistently, you will see that you are elevating inclusion. There's no question about it. Second behavior for cultural architects is to engage in micro coaching. Now, as I said at the beginning, micro coaching might be a bit of a new concept to you. What do we mean by micro coaching? We understand coaching and coaching behavior and coaching skill and coaching interactions. But how about micro coaching? Let's give you the definition. So the cultural architect of the 2020s is shifting his or her team to the practice of micro coaching, engaging in frequent, brief, in workflow coaching conversations. So let's describe these coaching interactions or encounters. They're bite-sized, normally not more than 10 minutes, sometimes much briefer than that, could be 30 seconds. They're informal, they're unscripted. You don't come prepared with a script. It's not staged at all. It's impromptu. So you didn't plan it. It's unplanned. It's targeted. So you're going to be talking about something in particular, something that's meaningful. It's at the moment of need. So it's really the moment or opportunity that creates the coaching encounter. So you see the opportunity and then you take advantage of it. And what do? We provide direction, correction, and continuous connection for these or during these coaching encounters. This is micro coaching. It's different than the formal, planned, let's sit down, little extended session, which can be pretty starchy, pretty formal, pretty uncomfortable. Now, sometimes we need the longer sessions, especially when we've got bigger issues that we need to talk about, and it just requires more time, and there needs to be more planning. But the vast majority of coaching happens on the informal side. And micro coaching is really the perfect tool, the perfect practice by which to be a cultural architect and continue to nurture and foster that environment of psychological safety, right? So Junior, don't we do this on our team? I mean, is this not the norm?
Holy smokes. This is the norm.
We would not survive without micro coaching.
No, we certainly would not, or at least we'd be much slower and much lower performing. It's been interesting to adopt this methodology as we have for several years, but moving it into the virtual world has been very interesting. And there's been a few comments in the chat about the online world. You know, how do you do this in a virtual environment? Because I can't just walk over to your desk and make the rounds as I might if I were with you co-located. Right. And for us, a couple tips that I've seen. One of the things that I like to do and that I've seen people do to me is just give me a ring on whatever your messaging system is, right? If you're using Messenger, if you're using Slack, and just saying what's up. Literally, I'll have team members give me a call that spend 5 minutes just saying what's up, and I will do the same thing to others. And it's a great opportunity to just check in and say, you know, what's the biggest issue you're dealing with today? How can I help you? In 5 to 10 minutes, and just unpacking some of that and giving some direction, giving some coaching. I love that format.
And another thing that we need to mention, Junior, is that it's not just the superior and the subordinate relationship. This is not just top-down coaching from the boss to the direct report. This is also peer-based coaching. We practice micro coaching throughout the day, don't we? I mean, this is really the way that we do this is the way that we run our business. And so the other thing that it does is micro coaching is a leveling mechanism as well, right? It's an equalizing mechanism. And so it helps us become culturally flat. And so as colleagues are coaching me, they may even report to me, but they get to coach me. Isn't that the way it should be? And that's what micro coaching allows. You can be having, and then I think a lot of times we have coaching sessions and we don't even know we're having them, because we certainly didn't label those as coaching sessions, and we didn't prepare for those. We didn't plan those, but that's the way it's supposed to work. It's incredibly effective. I don't know how you run a team or a business without micro coaching these days. We're in highly dynamic environments, right? It's amazing. Yeah. The third behavior for cultural architects should be engaged in learning agility as a modeling behavior. Now, what is learning agility? Learning agility itself means that you are learning at or above the speed of change. Now, why would we define it that way? Well, if you're not at or above the speed of change, you're going to have some unintended consequences that you're not going to be very happy with, right? Anything less will reward you with gradual and then sudden irrelevance. So if you're a cultural architect, you're asking your colleagues to learn with you. Now, notice the mindset that goes with this. You're not the oracle. You're not the command center. This is not the imperial model of leadership, right? That's back to the Industrial Revolution. So we're losing that. You are a fellow traveler and you're learning, you're living like the rest of us. Welcome, welcome to professional life in 2021. We're fellow travelers. We learn our living together, and this is what we do. And so we have to help each other learn at or above the speed of change. Now, there are several tools and I think best practices for doing this, right? But I'll just point out one. One of the most important things that you can do to stimulate and sustain learning agility is to ask questions, to catalyze that inquiry process with questions. Now, here's one tool in particular that's really quite effective. It's called the three-part innovative question set. So there's part one is, why do we do this? So you look around and you say, why are we doing this way? Why do we do it like this? Why do we keep doing that? So that's part one. Part two is, well, what if we did this? Right? So you're thinking, you're doing exploratory inquiry. And I'll talk about the distinction here in a minute. So why do we do it this way? What if we did this or something different? And if we did, last part, how could we do that? And so now we start brainstorming and ideating about how we could do something different. This question set is a fundamental tool for accelerating learning, for doing innovation, for learning at or above the speed of change, right? Any comments on that, Junior?
I want to acknowledge the fact that we're not absolving ourselves of the responsibility to execute, right? Some people will talk about this and say, oh yeah, it'd be really nice to have those conversations, but I have a business to run, right? Or I have a job to do, or this is what I have to do today. We acknowledge that. And there's always this healthy tension, hopefully, between execution and innovation. But if we're not spending time here, then we're doing something wrong and we will inevitably regret it because we will not learn above the speed of change. So yes, we need to execute today, but we need to spend some time living over here. It's very important.
And I'm so glad you said that, Junior, because one of the frameworks that we use at Leader Factor is that we really only do two things in organizations. We do execution and we do innovation. Execution is creating and delivering value today. Innovation is figuring out how we're going to create and deliver value tomorrow. That's all we do in organizations. Value today, figuring out how to do value tomorrow. execution, innovation. That's it. That's what we do in organizations. And so based on that, we can make a distinction between explanatory and exploratory inquiry. Explanatory inquiry means understanding what is happening now or what happened in the past. So we're explaining it, right? We're trying to understand cause and effect relationships. We're explaining what happened, right? But if we go to exploratory inquiry, then we get into what if, because we're talking about the future. The very last, the fourth and final behavior for cultural architects, cultural accountability. Now, as I said at the beginning, we understand accountability. We understand that we're all accountable, but being accountable for culture and for the way that you influence culture, that's a little different. Do you practice cultural accountability? Do the people in your organization, do the leaders, do the managers do this? So let's talk about this a little bit. Cultural architects practice cultural accountability. What does that mean? It means they hold others accountable not only for their results, but how they get their results. Many leaders don't know how to motivate and influence those they lead. So they use manipulation and coercion. Let me show you this. This is one of the conceptual tools that we use as we train leaders. It's called the spectrum of influence. You can think about influence on a spectrum. At one end, we have manipulation. Manipulation is based on what principle? Deception. At the other end of the spectrum, we have coercion. Coercion is based on what principle? What do we do when we're coercing people? Go to your chat on this one. What is coercion? Yeah, force, fear, power move. There we go. Arm twisting, intimidation. That's exactly right. So these are the ends of the spectrum of influence. Our point of view is that if you go to the left or the right, if you leave the middle is persuasion. The middle represents legitimate forms of influence. If you leave the middle, you're not leading anymore. If you're doing coercion or if you're doing manipulation, right? If it's power tools or tricks, you're not leading anymore. You're using manipulation or coercion as proxies for leadership, but you've abdicated leadership. You're not doing leadership anymore. You're doing manipulation or coercion. So what we're saying is a cultural architect holds people accountable to lead, to influence, to collaborate in the middle. So that raises a question. So if we can't use our tricks, manipulation, and we can't use our power tools, coercion, what do we do? What do we use? What are the legitimate forms of influence? So here's a question, and I would invite you to go to the chat for this. What are the tools in the middle of the spectrum of influence that we really need to invest in? We really need to come to mastery in. What's in the middle? Transparency, trust, collaboration, best practices, dialogue, empathy, excellent, coaching, giving the why, authenticity, vulnerability, communication, listening, emotional intelligence, negotiation, compassion, trust, values, integrity, flexibility. Yes. Do you see what's in the middle? There's a lot of things in the middle. So this is where we go to school. If you want to become a better leader, and by the way, when I say that, I don't mean title or position or authority. I mean your ability to influence, to help people achieve meaningful goals. That's what leadership is all about. Look at all of those tools and skills and competencies that are in the middle. Oh, I love it. Shared accountability, humility, inviting challenging opinions, All of those things are in the middle. That's where we go to school. That's where we need to come to mastery. So we model that, and then we hold others accountable for doing that as well. That's cultural accountability. Cultural accountability is to hold people accountable to stay in the middle and not go to manipulation, not resort to coercion, but stay in the middle. If you can do that, you build an organization with incredibly high levels of psychological safety because we have predictive understanding concerning our behavior. We know how we're going to behave. We know what tools we're going to use. And we know where the boundaries are. And we know what's out of bounds. And so we're going to patrol those boundaries in a very healthy, respectful way. And don't we deserve that? Isn't that what humans deserve? I think so.
It absolutely is.
Any other comments or observations?
A lot of these. It looks like you all are really enjoying this slide. If you're in LinkedIn and you're liking this slide, give the stream a thumbs up. So one of the comments that I really like is Kevin's, does it not take a personal choice to get off the sidelines? It absolutely does. And you have to choose to get in and start using some of these mechanisms that we've talked about. So I'm looking at like 150 plus different ways that we can operate in the middle. And these comments are wonderful. So really take advantage of these, read them, bake them in, write down some of those that are most impactful to you that you feel you could use most as a leader.
Yeah. Yeah. And please don't ever misinterpret and misunderstand that the middle is weak. Do you know what's weak? I'll tell you what's weak.
Love that.
Resorting to manipulation or coercion, that's weak. That means you've abdicated leadership. That means that you're trying to find a shortcut to get people to do what you want them to do. That's the easy way out. Do you know where the hard work is? The hard work is in the middle. That's where we really have to put the effort in, and we have to practice, and we have to come with pure intent to our interactions. This is really where leadership is done. So, yeah, your comments are incredible. Resilience, right? Resilience is in the middle. There's look at everything that is located in the middle that we have to work on. So it's quite a curriculum, isn't it? It's quite a curriculum. So please stay in the middle, then hold other people accountable to stay in the middle. That is cultural accountability. That's what we're talking about. Okay. So before we go into the Q&A, I'll just mention briefly that what are we trying to do as cultural architects? We're trying to move our teams through the 4 stages of psychological safety. This is what we're trying to do. We're trying to move from stage 1 inclusion safety, right? Stage 1 inclusion safety means that I feel included, I feel accepted, I feel a sense of belonging. And then we move to stage 2, learner safety. I can engage in the learning process and I'm not going to be embarrassed or marginalized in doing that. I'm actually going to be rewarded for that vulnerable activity. And then we go to contributor safety. I have the opportunity to make a meaningful contribution, to make a difference, to carry my weight, which is what I want to do. And then finally, stage 4, challenger safety. I feel safe to challenge the status quo without fear of getting clobbered, of retaliation, for putting my career on the line. I can do that. That behavior is rewarded. So can you see, again, psychological safety is an environment of rewarded vulnerability. What kind of vulnerability? The vulnerability in these 4 stages: being included, bringing your whole self to work, learning, self-discovery, collaborative learning, all types of learning, contributing, and then finally challenging the status quo so that we can innovate, because this is the realm of innovation. So just wanted to go over that briefly, and hopefully these 4 behaviors of a cultural architect will help. Okay, so with that then, Junior, I'll turn it over to you to talk about a couple of things.
Yes. So one of the things that I wanted to mention is today's giveaway. So thank you for hanging around to this point. The giveaway is the highest value giveaway we've ever done. And we are going to be giving away 1 seat to our August 26th 4 stages certification. So many of you are probably aware that Leader Factor hosts about twice a month certifications in the 4 stages of psychological safety. They're about a half day. We go deep into the 4 stages model, give you administrative access to all of our IP, all of the technology. And the way that you're going to enter the giveaway today is by purchasing an online course license to the Leader Factor platform to do the 4 stages online course. So some of you have been around through the beta of this product. What we've done is we've launched a brand new platform incorporating all of the feedback that we received through the beta period. And I wanted to just show you what this looks like quickly so that you get a sense for the type of content that we've put into this online course. Our team members that are moderating each of the channels will put a link to the online course in the chat, and you'll also be getting an email after this session with details as to how to register. And of course, you don't have to do this. But if you would like to learn more about psychological safety, equip yourself with more tools, and put together an individual action plan to become better, then this is for you. And of course, the certification you can learn more about on the site. I will mention that there are about 6 seats left for the August certification. We started the certifications about a year ago, and we have sold out every single one that we have done. So those are hard seats to come by. So if you haven't registered and you've been looking at it, now is probably the chance. So you'll see these modules here: crack yourself open, culture by design or by default, a little bit what we're talking about today. There's a module on the what and why of psychological safety. Each of these contains videos, talking head from Dr. Clark, along with concept reviews, downloadable resources. And then inside the 4 stages module, this is really cool. Inside inclusion, behavior, or safety, you'll choose behaviors that you're going to be working on over your development period. And that development period will be supported by a bunch of messaging, emails that you'll get throughout the week based on the behaviors that you choose. It's a very, very, very cool thing. And this is available for individuals, really applicable at all levels of the organization. So this is available to you. And once again, people that purchase a seat in the online course will be entered to win a seat in the certification that's going to be happening in August. If you would like to bring stuff like this into your organization, you can reach out to us through the website if this is something that you'd like to roll out more broadly. But we wanted to make you aware of that, let you know that it is fully updated and ready to go. Okay, with that being said, let's move into some Q&A for the last few minutes. So any questions? We would love to see your comments and questions in the chat, and we'll spend the last few minutes going through these. Okay?
Let's do it.
Okay. We'll just keep watching this chat as the questions roll in. Pick out some good ones. So if you have someone in the chat, Gareth, so you don't have to put it in the Q&A section, just in the chat. Will learner safety even come before inclusion safety? That's an interesting question.
Wonderful
So the sequence
question.
of the stages is very intentional. And what we find through our global survey research is that most people are concerned. And when I say most, I mean like above 90%. I can't remember what the figure is. It's like 94% want to be included before they engage in any of the subsequent stages. And so when we enter any new social collective, that's really what we're concerned about is, do I belong here? Am I accepted? Am I going to be treated okay? And then from there, we might engage and ask a question, right? I'd like to learn this. Yes, can you tell me more? No, I don't know how to do that. Would you show me? Then we move into contribution and applying the things that we learned, and finally challenging. So that sequence is very, very deliberate.
There's another question in here, Junior, about the relationship between, I guess, psychological safety and agile. And this is a question that we get all the time. I mean, we do agile here at Leader Factor as well. We're doing our huddles, we're doing our scrums, we're doing our sprints. Psychological safety provides the underlying conditions that you need in order to do agile. If you adopt agile methodology and tools, you're not going to be able to do it if you don't have the underlying cultural conditions, right? You're not going to get there.
Yeah.
We see organizations that invest massively in agile in terms of agile training and tools and methodology, but they can't get off the ground because they don't have the underlying conditions that enable agile to happen. That's where psychological safety comes in. Yeah.
Yep. Jade, this is an interesting question. How do you suggest holding people accountable in educational institutions? So we find that there are certain patterns amidst organizations with benevolent missions, healthcare, nonprofit, education, and I would point us back to cultural accountability and the espoused values that we have and the de facto values that we have. If those things are different, if there's a dissonance, then we have a cultural accountability problem. And we need to patrol the boundaries of respect. And when there's an infraction that needs to be dealt with appropriately, and there really can't be tolerance for it, we're going to get what we tolerate in situations like this. And the tolerance, if it's any more than 0, that's a bad thing. And we're going to get more infractions than we would like to see. And we would like to see none. So with that being said, that's really where I push those types of questions, is cultural accountability. Because certainly bullying and harassment, those types of things aren't going to be espoused values of anyone. And our espoused values are most likely going to be wonderful. We just got to stick to them and have accountability in place.
Yeah, Junior, there's a question here about how do you introduce micro coaching to your team and your organization? We get that a lot. So one of our primary solutions is called micro coaching and accountability. And in that solution, we help people understand micro coaching and accountability tools that they can implement immediately. And that's the key, is that you've got to go straight to implementation, and then people have to see impact in the short term. And if they can do that, you're going to get an accelerated adoption curve, and you're going to be able to make some huge gains. So I just wanted to mention that.
Love that. Okay, everyone, we are at the top of the hour. Thank you for spending your time with us today. We appreciate you. We really do. You are the reason that we do these webinars. We started it off as a test. Now we're 19 deep, and we will continue doing them. So we realize that there are a lot of questions that are in the chat. Feel free to engage with us through all of our channels. Follow us on LinkedIn, subscribe to us on YouTube, get into the course and take advantage of that. The book, if you haven't. We're trying to put out tons of resource out into the world, both unpaid and paid, to make sure that you have access to all of the tools that you need to become a cultural architect. So with that, we will go ahead and sign off. You'll be given a recording of this session. That'll probably come out in the newsletter next week, if not a little bit sooner than that, as well as instructions in an email before 8 p.m. EST. Remember that if you're interested in purchasing the online course for a seat in the certification. The last thing that I want to say from me is thank you for caring about people. What we find is that the dominant pattern amongst people that attend these webinars is that they care about people. So thank you for all of the work that you do wherever you are. We know you're all over the place doing all sorts of things. Psychological safety is at the heart of it all. So thank you for being with us. Tim, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks very much, Junior. In closing, just remember, you are a cultural architect. And regardless of whether you approach it by design or by default, you will get a culture. And so we suggest that you do it by design and that you jump into your role as a cultural architect. So thanks very much for being with us. And we look forward to seeing you next month. Take care, everybody.
Give a like to the stream on YouTube. Give a like to the stream on LinkedIn. Share this if you have friends or colleagues that you think would be interested. And we'll catch you next month. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful weekend.